I recently inherited an antique mirror from my grandmother's estate. The mirror was beautiful, with an intricately carved wooden frame and a large, oval-shaped glass pane. At first, I was thrilled to receive such a valuable and elegant piece of furniture, but as I began to spend more time looking at myself in the mirror, I began to feel uneasy. It started with small things. I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. The longer I gazed into the mirror, the more the feeling of unease intensified. I began to notice that my reflection seemed to change subtly, as if it were morphing into something else. At first, the changes were small and almost imperceptible. My eyes would seem to darken or my hair would appear to be a slightly different shade, but over time the changes became more pronounced. My reflection would take on a sinister, almost demonic appearance with glowing red eyes and sharp teeth. I would try to look away, but I couldn't tear my gaze from the mirror. The longer I looked, the more I felt as if I were being pulled into the mirror, as if I were being drawn into some kind of alternate reality. I began to have nightmares about the mirror, dreaming that I was trapped inside it, surrounded by twisted and malevolent spirit. One night, I woke up to find myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection. I had no memory of getting out of bed, but there I was, transfixed by the eerie glow of the mirror. Suddenly, my reflection began to change again, this time into something more monstrous than I'd ever seen before. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, unable to move as my reflection reached out of the mirror and grabbed me by the shoulders. I don't remember what happened next, but when I woke up the next morning, I was lying on the floor in front of the mirror, covered in sweat and shaking with fear. From that day on, I avoided the mirror as much as possible. I would cover it with a cloth or turn it around so that it faced the wall, anything to avoid the feeling of being drawn into its dark and twisted world. As time went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was somehow watching me. Even when it was covered or turned around, I could sense its presence in the room. It was as if the mirror had a life of its own, and I was nothing more than a pawn in its game. I tried to rationalize my fear, telling myself that it was just an old mirror with no real power. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more the mirror seemed to exert its influence over me. One night, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. I felt as if something was drawing me towards the mirror, and I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. I got out of bed and walked over to the mirror, staring into its depths. As I looked, I saw my reflection begin to change once again, this time into a grotesque, twisted version of myself. My skin was pale and clammy, my eyes were bloodshot and sunken, and my hair was wild and unkempt. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. It was as if the mirror had a hold on me, and I was powerless to resist. Suddenly, my reflection began to move, and I saw a hand reach out of the mirror towards me. I tried to back away, but it was too late. The hand grabbed me by the wrist, and I felt a surge of icy coldness course through my body. I screamed and tried to pull away, but the grip on my wrist was too strong. I was being pulled towards the mirror, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I felt as if I was being swallowed whole, consumed by the dark and twisted world inside the mirror. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor in front of the mirror, covered in sweat and shaking with fear. I knew then that I had to get rid of the mirror, that I couldn't keep it in my house any longer. I tried to sell it, but no one wanted it. It was as if the mirror had a curse upon it, and no one wanted to be associated with it. In the end, I decided to destroy it. I took a hammer to the mirror, smashing it into 1,000 pieces. As I did, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and I knew that I had done the right thing. But even now, years later, I still have nightmares about the mirror. I still feel as if it's watching me, even though it's long gone. And sometimes, in my dreams, I hear a voice whispering to me from the other side of the mirror, promising me power and knowledge beyond anything I could imagine. But I know better than to listen. I know the price that comes with such knowledge, and I'm not willing to pay it.